On a crisp autumn morning, the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as Marcus Thompson arrived at John F. Kennedy International Airport. A successful black CEO who had built his tech empire from scratch, Marcus was no stranger to luxury travel. Today's flight to London wasn't just another business trip, it was a milestone. He was set to deliver a keynote speech at one of Europe's largest tech conferences, an event that would further cement his reputation on the global stage. He walked through the bustling terminal. Marcus exuded confidence. His tailored navy blue suit paired with polished leather shoes spoke volumes about his meticulous nature. The first-class lounge buzzed with activity, business executives typing away on laptops, families enjoying complimentary snacks, and travelers sipping coffee while scrolling through emails. Marcus took a moment to relax before boarding, savoring a cup of freshly brewed espresso. For him, this brief pause was essential. It allowed him to mentally prepare for the journey ahead. When boarding commenced, Marcus made his way to Gate 17, where passengers were lining up according to their zones. First-class travelers were called first, and Marcus stepped forward, flashing his boarding pass to the attendant with a polite smile. As he entered the aircraft, the familiar scent of fresh upholstery greeted him, a small comfort during long flights. His seat, 3A, was a coveted window position near the front of the cabin. It offered not only stunning views but also easy access to amenities like priority meal service and extra legroom. Marcus settled into his plush leather seat, placing his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. He pulled out his noise-canceling headphones and adjusted them around his neck, ready to immerse himself in either music or work once the plane took off. Outside the window, ground staff moved briskly, guiding fuel trucks and luggage carts across the tarmac. Everything seemed perfectly normal, even serene. Little did Marcus know that his peaceful start to the day was about to be disrupted by something entirely unexpected. Minutes later, as more passengers began filing onto the plane, Marcus noticed a commotion near the entrance. A tall man, clearly agitated, was speaking loudly to one of the flight attendants. From what Marcus could overhear, the man appeared dissatisfied with his assigned seating arrangement. Though he couldn't make out every word, the tone of frustration was unmistakable. Eventually, the man gestured toward the first-class section, prompting two flight attendants to approach Marcus's row. The taller of the two attendants, a woman with neatly pinned back hair and a practiced smile, leaned down beside Marcus's seat. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice overly sweet yet tinged with urgency. "We have a situation here. One of our premium passengers has requested a seat change due to personal preferences. Would you mind switching seats with them?" Marcus blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "I'm sorry," he replied calmly, "but I booked this seat specifically. It's my assigned spot." The attendant nodded, but didn't seem deterred. "We understand, Mr. Thompson, and we appreciate your cooperation. However, this passenger feels that your current seat would better accommodate their needs. We'd be happy to reassign you to another seat within first class." At this point, curiosity turned to disbelief. Marcus glanced past the attendant to see the man now standing behind her, arms crossed and wearing an expression of entitlement. Something about the scenario felt off. Not just the audacity of the request, but the underlying implication that Marcus's presence in the seat was somehow negotiable because of someone else's discomfort. "I'm afraid I'll have to decline," Marcus said firmly, maintaining eye contact with the attendant. "This is my reserved seat and I intend to stay here." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The attendant's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Behind her, the tall man let out an exaggerated sigh, rolling his eyes as if to emphasize his impatience. Other passengers nearby started glancing over, sensing the tension brewing. Some looked sympathetic toward Marcus while others simply observed silently, unsure of how the standoff would unfold. What began as a routine boarding process had morphed into something far more complicated. For Marcus, this wasn't merely about keeping his seat. It was about asserting his rights as a paying customer and refusing to be treated as expendable. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that the airline crew hadn't anticipated such resistance. Their attempts to resolve the issue grew increasingly clumsy, setting the stage for a confrontation that neither side could have foreseen. The ripple effects of this seemingly minor disagreement were about to spiral outward, touching lives far beyond the confines of the airplane cabin. But for now, all eyes were on Marcus, whose calm demeanor masked a simmering determination to stand his ground. As the moments passed, the tension inside the first-class cabin grew thicker. Marcus remained seated, his posture relaxed but resolute. He had already stated his position clearly. He wasn't going to give up his seat simply because someone else wanted it. Yet instead of accepting his decision and moving on, the lead flight attendant seemed determined to push the matter further. Her voice softened into what some might call conciliatory tones, though her words carried an unmistakable edge. "Sir," she began again, leaning closer as if trying to appeal directly to Marcus's sense of reason. "We understand this is inconvenient for you, but we're asking for your cooperation in the spirit of customer service. We assure you that the alternative seat will be just as comfortable." Marcus raised an eyebrow at this. Comfortable? The implication bothered him, not because he doubted the quality of the other seats, but because the entire situation felt like a veiled attempt to undermine his dignity. Here he was, a man who had earned every privilege associated with his success, being asked to step aside for no valid reason other than another passenger's preference. It wasn't about comfort. It was about hierarchy, power dynamics, and perhaps even prejudice. "I appreciate your efforts," Marcus replied evenly, keeping his tone measured despite the rising frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "But I paid for this seat just like everyone else here did for theirs. If there's an issue, shouldn't it be addressed with the person making the request rather than me?" His response drew murmurs from nearby passengers. Some nodded approvingly, while others exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. One elderly woman seated across the aisle leaned forward slightly, her expression one of quiet support. "You're absolutely right," she whispered loud enough for Marcus to hear. Her words were simple but carried weight, reinforcing the growing sentiment among those witnessing the exchange. The tall man, whose initial demand had sparked the conflict, shifted uncomfortably where he stood. For all his earlier bravado, he now seemed less certain of himself. Perhaps he hadn't anticipated resistance, or maybe he hadn't considered how public scrutiny might affect the outcome. Either way, his body language betrayed a flicker of unease. Still, pride kept him rooted in place, unwilling to back down, without getting what he wanted. Meanwhile, the flight attendants conferred briefly in hushed tones near the galley. Their whispers carried traces of panic, as though they were scrambling for a solution that wouldn't escalate matters further. When they returned, their approach shifted subtly. Instead of appealing to Marcus's goodwill, they tried a different tactic: guilt. "Mr. Thompson," said the second attendant, a younger man with a nervous smile, "we really don't want to cause any trouble, but this could delay our departure. Other passengers are waiting to board, and we need to resolve this quickly. Surely, switching seats wouldn't inconvenience you too much?" It was a clever ploy, framing the issue as a collective inconvenience rather than a personal affront. But Marcus saw through it immediately. Delaying the flight? That excuse rang hollow when weighed against the principle at stake. If anything, it highlighted the absurdity of the situation, the idea that dozens of people should wait because one individual refused to accept his assigned seat. "No," Marcus responded firmly, his voice steady and commanding enough to silence the murmurs around him. "This isn't about delaying the flight or inconveniencing anyone else. This is about fairness. I'm not moving unless I'm given a legitimate reason, not just someone else's preferences." By now, the incident had drawn the attention of nearly everyone in the first-class section. Conversations ceased, replaced by a palpable air of anticipation. Even the economy-class passengers craning their necks from behind could sense that something significant was unfolding. Some openly sided with Marcus, nodding along with his arguments, while others watched nervously, wondering how far the confrontation would go. One businessman seated diagonally from Marcus finally spoke up. "Excuse me," he interjected, addressing the attendants. I've been listening to this whole thing, and frankly, it seems pretty straightforward. Mr. Thompson has every right to keep his seat. Why can't you find another solution? The question hung in the air unanswered. The attendants exchanged uneasy looks, clearly unprepared for such direct criticism from multiple directions. They weren't used to facing pushback, especially not from high-profile customers like Marcus, and certainly not en masse. The dynamic had shifted dramatically, transforming what started as a private disagreement into a public spectacle. Realizing they were losing control of the narrative, the lead flight attendant made one final plea. "Please, sir," she implored, her voice tinged with desperation. "Just consider relocating temporarily. We'll ensure you're compensated for the inconvenience." At this point, Marcus decided to take a different approach. Rather than continuing to argue, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. With deliberate slowness, he unlocked the screen and opened his contacts list. Then, looking directly at the attendant, he said calmly, "If you insist on pursuing this, I'll make a single phone call. After that, let's see how things play out." The room fell eerily silent. No one needed clarification about what kind of call Marcus was referring to. His reputation preceded him, and the implications of involving higher authorities, whether corporate sponsors, legal teams, or media outlets, were crystal clear. For the first time since the ordeal began, the attendants appeared genuinely rattled. Their faces flushed and their movements became jittery, betraying the realization that they had underestimated both Marcus's influence and his resolve. In that moment, the power balance shifted decisively. What had started as a minor seating dispute had evolved into something far greater, a test of dignity, respect, and accountability. And while Marcus remained composed throughout, his actions sent a powerful message. He wouldn't tolerate discrimination or mistreatment, regardless of the context. The crew may have thought they were dealing with a routine complaint, but they were about to learn that underestimating Marcus Thompson came at a steep price. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the unresolved tension lingered like storm clouds gathering overhead. The attendants retreated to their stations, casting furtive glances toward Marcus, who sat quietly, scrolling through emails as if nothing unusual had occurred. Yet everyone aboard knew better. Something monumental had transpired, an event that would ripple far beyond the confines of the aircraft once it touched down in London. As the plane soared above the Atlantic Ocean, Marcus sat quietly in his seat, gazing out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below. The confrontation with the airline staff and the tall passenger had left a sour taste in his mouth, but outwardly he appeared calm and collected. Inside, however, his mind raced. He replayed the incident over and over again, dissecting every word, every glance, and every attempt to pressure him into giving up his rightful place. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about something much bigger. Marcus had encountered discrimination before, both subtle and overt, throughout his career. But this situation felt different. This time, it happened in plain sight, witnessed by dozens of people who could see exactly what was unfolding. It wasn't hidden behind closed doors or masked by polite euphemisms. It was blatant, undeniable, and infuriating. And while Marcus knew he had handled himself with grace under pressure, he also understood that silence wouldn't solve anything. Sometimes standing your ground required more than words. It demanded action. Once the fasten seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began settling into their routines, some reading books, others watching movies, and a few drifting off to sleep, Marcus opened his laptop. He typed out a detailed account of what had transpired, capturing not only the facts but also the emotions tied to the experience. His tone was measured yet firm, avoiding inflammatory language while still conveying the gravity of the situation. When he finished writing, he saved the document and attached it to an email addressed to several key recipients: his personal attorney, the CEO of the airline, and a trusted journalist known for covering stories related to social justice. Before hitting send, Marcus hesitated for a moment. He thought about the potential fallout, not just for himself but for everyone involved. Would this escalate unnecessarily? Could it damage relationships with future business partners? These were valid concerns, but they didn't outweigh the importance of speaking up. If he stayed silent, nothing would change. The same discriminatory practices would continue unchecked, affecting countless others who might not have the resources or platform to fight back. Taking a deep breath, Marcus pressed send. Within minutes, his legal team responded. They assured him they would handle the matter professionally and discreetly, ensuring that the airline understood the seriousness of the situation. Next, the airline's executive office replied, a terse acknowledgement that promised a thorough investigation. But it was the journalist's response that set things in motion faster than Marcus anticipated. Recognizing the story's significance, the journalist asked permission to share Marcus's account publicly. After receiving Marcus's approval, the journalist crafted a compelling narrative and posted it online, tagging Marcus in the article. The reaction was instantaneous. Within hours, the hashtag #MarseatGate began trending on social media platforms worldwide. People from all walks of life chimed in, sharing their own experiences of facing similar treatment during flights. Some recounted being moved from premium seats despite having paid full fare, while others described instances of racial profiling or outright hostility from airline staff. The floodgates had opened, and Marcus's story became a rallying cry for those demanding accountability and systemic change within the aviation industry. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to contain the growing backlash. Public relations teams worked around the clock drafting statements and strategizing how best to address the controversy without alienating customers. Internally, executives held emergency meetings to discuss possible solutions. However, none of these efforts could undo the damage already done. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach exponentially. By the time the plane touched down at Heathrow Airport, Marcus's name was synonymous with resilience and integrity. Stepping off the aircraft, Marcus felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was relieved to have arrived safely after such a tense flight. On the other hand, he knew the real work was just beginning. Reporters awaited him near the arrival gates, microphones thrust forward as cameras flashed brightly. Despite the chaos, Marcus remained composed. He greeted them politely, acknowledging their questions with brief answers that emphasized his desire for meaningful change rather than vengeance. "I'm here today because I believe in fairness," Marcus said, addressing the crowd. "This isn't about me versus anyone else. It's about creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race, gender, or background. What happened on that flight shouldn't happen to anyone ever." His words resonated deeply, earning applause from bystanders and journalists alike. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the airline issued a public apology, vowing to review its policies and hold accountable those responsible for the incident. But public apologies often rang hollow unless backed by concrete actions, and Marcus intended to ensure that real consequences followed. Less than 24 hours later, news broke that the entire crew involved in the altercation, the lead flight attendant, the junior attendants, and even the pilot, had been terminated without severance pay. The decision sent shockwaves through the aviation community. While some praised the airline for taking swift action, others criticized the move as overly harsh, arguing that the employees were merely following protocol, or perhaps simply caught in the crossfire of a larger issue. Regardless of where one stood on the matter, the firings underscored the seriousness of the situation and served as a stark reminder of the power of advocacy when wielded effectively. For Marcus, though, the outcome wasn't about revenge. It was about sending a message. Discrimination has no place in modern society, and those who perpetuate it must be held accountable. As he prepared for his keynote speech the following day, Marcus reflected on the whirlwind of events. What started as a routine flight had transformed into a catalyst for change, a testament to the fact that courage and conviction can spark movements far greater than any individual. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would inspire countless others to stand up, speak out, and demand better. The fallout from the #MarseatGate incident rippled through every corner of the aviation industry and beyond. The airline's decision to terminate the entire crew involved in the altercation dominated headlines for days, sparking heated debates across talk shows, social media platforms, and dinner tables around the world. For Marcus Thompson, the whirlwind of attention was both empowering and exhausting. While he appreciated the support pouring in from strangers who shared their own stories of discrimination, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment needed to transcend personal grievances and become a turning point for systemic change. In the days following the firings, the terminated employees began speaking out, defending their actions in interviews with various news outlets. The lead flight attendant, visibly shaken during her appearance on a morning show, claimed she had simply been following protocol when asking Marcus to switch seats. It wasn't about race or anything like that, she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. We were trying to accommodate a passenger who expressed discomfort. That's our job, to make sure everyone feels safe and comfortable. Her explanation fell flat for many viewers, especially given the context of the situation. Critics pointed out that comfort wasn't the issue. It was the underlying assumption that Marcus, as a black man, could be easily displaced because someone else deemed themselves more deserving of his seat. Others questioned why the airline hadn't intervened earlier to diffuse the tension, instead of escalating it by repeatedly pressuring Marcus. Meanwhile, the tall passenger at the center of the dispute also broke his silence.
In an interview conducted over Zoom, he admitted that he regretted how things had unfolded but stopped short of apologizing directly to Marcus. "I just wanted a better seat," he said defensively. "I didn't think it would blow up into
something so big." His tone bordered on dismissive, which only fueled further backlash online. Memes mocking his comments flooded social media, with users sarcastically suggesting he might prefer a private jet next time to avoid such inconveniences. Despite these attempts to justify their roles in the incident, public opinion remained firmly against the fired crew and the passenger. Many saw their explanations not as clarifications but as excuses, a way to downplay the gravity of what had happened. The airline, too, faced mounting criticism for its handling of the situation. While firing the staff members might have seemed like a decisive move, critics argued that it failed to address the root causes of the problem. Training programs, hiring practices, and corporate culture all played a role in shaping how employees interacted with passengers, and none of those areas had received adequate scrutiny. Recognizing the need for deeper accountability, Marcus took matters into his own hands. He reached out to advocacy groups specializing in racial justice and consumer rights, proposing a collaboration to tackle discrimination within the travel industry. Together, they launched Fly with Dignity, an initiative aimed at educating travelers about their rights and pushing airlines to adopt stricter anti-discrimination policies. The campaign included workshops, informational videos, and even a hotline where passengers could report incidents of bias without fear of retaliation. One of the most impactful components of Fly with Dignity was its focus on storytelling. Marcus invited individuals from diverse backgrounds to share their experiences of being mistreated while traveling. These accounts ranged from subtle microaggressions, like being ignored by flight attendants despite repeated requests for assistance, to overt acts of racism, such as being removed from flights for no valid reason. Each story added weight to the growing demand for reform, humanizing the statistics and studies often cited in discussions about systemic inequality. As momentum built behind the initiative, major airlines began taking notice. Several companies issued statements pledging to review their diversity training programs and implement new measures to prevent discriminatory behavior among staff. Some went a step further, partnering with Fly with Dignity to develop comprehensive educational modules for employees at all levels. Even airports joined the effort, hosting seminars and awareness campaigns designed to foster inclusivity for travelers from all walks of life. However, not everyone welcomed these changes with open arms. Within the aviation community, resistance simmered beneath the surface. Veteran pilots and flight attendants grumbled about what they perceived as overcorrection, claiming that heightened sensitivity requirements placed unreasonable burdens on already stressful jobs. A few unions representing airline workers publicly criticized the firings, arguing that individual mistakes shouldn't result in career-ending consequences. Their stance highlighted the tension between holding people accountable and ensuring fair treatment for employees caught in high-profile controversies. Amidst the back and forth, Marcus remained steadfast in his mission. He understood that progress rarely came without pushback, and he refused to let detractors derail the movement he had helped ignite. During interviews, he emphasized the importance of striking a balance between accountability and education. "This isn't about punishing people for making mistakes," he explained. "It's about creating systems that prevent those mistakes from happening in the first place. When we invest in training and cultural awareness, we create safer, more respectful environments for everyone." His words resonated deeply with audiences worldwide. Corporations outside the aviation sector began reaching out to learn how they could apply similar principles within their industries. Tech startups, retail chains, and hospitality brands sought advice on implementing diversity initiatives modeled after Fly with Dignity. For Marcus, this marked a pivotal shift. What started as a personal battle had evolved into a global conversation about equity and inclusion. Back home, Marcus continued balancing his responsibilities as a CEO with his newfound role as an advocate. Though the constant media appearances and meetings sometimes left him drained, he found solace in knowing that his efforts were making a difference. Every email from a grateful traveler, every testimonial from someone inspired to speak up, reinforced his belief that standing up against injustice, even in the smallest ways, could spark meaningful change. By the time the dust settled, the Seatgate controversy had transformed far beyond a single flight or seating arrangement. It became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that dignity is non-negotiable, and a call to action for industries to reflect on their practices and strive for fairness. And while Marcus knew there was still much work to be done, he felt hopeful about the future. After all, if one person's courage could inspire millions to demand better, imagine what collective action might achieve. In the weeks and months that followed the Tottenham Seatgate incident, Marcus Thompson's life underwent a profound transformation. What began as a personal ordeal had blossomed into a global movement, with Fly with Dignity becoming a beacon of hope for countless travelers who felt marginalized or mistreated by the systems meant to serve them. The initiative gained traction not only in the aviation industry, but also across other sectors where discrimination often went unaddressed. For Marcus, this newfound role as an advocate brought both challenges and rewards, reshaping how he viewed his purpose in the world. One of the most remarkable outcomes of the movement was the sheer number of stories it unearthed. People from all corners of the globe reached out to share their experiences, some heart-wrenching, others infuriating, and many inspiring. A young mother recounted being forced to give up her bassinet seat on a long-haul flight because the airline prioritized a last-minute upgrade for a wealthier passenger. A disabled traveler described being mocked by gate agents when requesting assistance boarding the plane. An elderly couple shared how they were repeatedly overlooked during meal service simply because they didn't speak English fluently. Each story added another layer to the collective understanding of systemic bias, reinforcing the urgent need for change. These accounts weren't just statistics. They were real lives impacted by indifference, prejudice, or outright hostility. Marcus made it a point to listen intently to every voice, knowing that amplifying these narratives was key to driving progress. He organized virtual town halls where affected individuals could speak directly to airline executives, policymakers, and advocacy leaders. These sessions were raw and emotional, but they also fostered accountability. Executives who initially dismissed the concerns found themselves face-to-face with the human cost of their policies, or lack thereof. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. The ripple effects extended far beyond the travel industry. Retail giants revamped their customer service protocols after hearing about discriminatory practices in stores. Hospitality chains introduced mandatory diversity training programs for staff at hotels and resorts. Even tech companies revisited their algorithms to ensure they weren't perpetuating biases in hiring or user interactions. It seemed that wherever inequality lurked, Fly with Dignity sparked conversations that led to tangible action. For Marcus personally, the journey wasn't without its sacrifices. As a CEO, he already juggled demanding responsibilities, but now his schedule was packed with speaking engagements, strategy meetings, and media appearances. Late nights became the norm as he worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. Friends and colleagues occasionally cautioned him about burnout, urging him to slow down. But Marcus couldn't bring himself to step back. Not yet. Every time he received a message from someone thanking him for giving them the courage to stand up for themselves, he knew the effort was worth it. Still, there were moments of doubt. Some critics accused him of grandstanding, claiming that his high-profile status gave him an unfair advantage in advocating for change. Others argued that initiatives like Fly with Dignity placed too much emphasis on individual accountability rather than addressing structural issues within industries. While these criticisms stung, Marcus chose to see them as opportunities for growth. He invited skeptics to join the conversation, believing that constructive dialogue could bridge divides and strengthen the movement. Over time, even some of his harshest detractors softened their stance, recognizing the sincerity behind his efforts. As the months passed, Marcus began noticing subtle shifts in societal attitudes. Airlines started rolling out new policies aimed at preventing discriminatory behavior. One carrier implemented anonymous reporting tools so passengers could flag incidents without fear of retaliation. Another introduced dignity champions on board flights, designated crew members trained specifically to handle sensitive situations involving bias or conflict. Airports, too, embraced inclusivity measures, installing multilingual signage, offering prayer rooms, and providing gender-neutral restrooms. These changes may have seemed small individually, but together, they signaled a cultural shift toward greater empathy and respect. On a personal level, Marcus found renewed inspiration in the resilience of those around him. He met activists fighting for racial justice, disability rights, and LGBTQ+ equality, each bringing unique perspectives to the table. Their passion reminded him that no single person could dismantle systemic oppression alone. It took collaboration, persistence, and unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future. This realization deepened his commitment to using his platform wisely, ensuring that Fly with Dignity remained inclusive and accessible to all. By the one-year anniversary of the Marne Seatgate incident, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at the same tech conference where his keynote speech had sparked international attention. This time, however, the focus wasn't on innovation or business strategies. It was on humanity. As he addressed the audience, his voice carried the weight of everything he'd learned over the past year. "When I boarded that flight," he began, pausing to let the significance sink in, "I never imagined it would lead me here. I thought I was just another traveler heading to work. But sometimes life presents us with moments that challenge us to rise above ourselves, to stand firm in our values and demand more from the world. That day taught me that dignity isn't something we should have to fight for. It's a right, not a privilege." His words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation from the crowd. Afterward, attendees lined up to thank him, sharing how his story had inspired them to confront injustices in their own lives. For Marcus, these connections reaffirmed why he had chosen this path. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but every step forward mattered. Looking ahead, Marcus envisioned a future where movements like Fly with Dignity weren't necessary, a world where respect and fairness were ingrained in every interaction. Until then, he vowed to continue pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and uplifting voices that might otherwise go unheard. Because if one man's refusal to give up his seat could spark a revolution, imagine what millions united in purpose could achieve. And so, Marcus carried on, driven by the belief that dignity was worth fighting for, not just for himself, but for everyone. His journey was far from over, but with each passing day, the vision of a more equitable world grew closer.